So, hi, I'm Emily Brown. I come from a mixed family farm in Bedfordshire. So we have arables, so crops such as wheat, barley. We also grow beans as well. And we do also try out other crops as well on a bit more of a trial basis. We've also got livestock as well. So we've got cattle, pigs, and we also have turkeys that go at Christmas time. So great Christmas dinner. We've also got a farm shop as well, so we've diversified. Increasing challenges across farming's meant that actually we've had to look at different income streams. So diversification for us was a simple answer, and we started doing that in 2005, and it's gone from there. So we farm just over 1,000 acres, so still relatively small, but all very much in hand and very much a family business. So grew up in Bedfordshire, then went to uni, went to Harper Adams in Shropshire and studied agriculture with farm business management, which was fantastic. And since then, I'm now working as a rural advisor, so helping those in the rural and farming industries to farm better and farm smarter. So I want to talk to you today about precision agriculture. So basically, precision agriculture, summed up simply, means that you're embracing technology. You're looking at how you can farm smarter, more efficiently, and save money, and also look after the environment, which is very important. So firstly, touching on the arable side, there's something called variable rate technology, which basically means that rather than blanket covering your field in fertilizer or other chemicals, you can actually look at mapping and apply inputs just to certain areas of your field. So this is, to start with, going to massively reduce costs by just putting it on certain areas of the field. That's a massive benefit. In farming, our margins are really being squeezed, so actually we need to look at where we can save any kind of amount of money, however marginal that is. But also, from an environmental perspective, if we're not putting loads of inputs onto the field, if you've then got really heavy rainfall, there's less chance of it running off and going into water courses, and farmers are incredibly conscious of this. As well as the variable rate technology, which means that you can adapt as to how you're farming, there's also something that you can do that's also looking at applications just on like boom section control. So simply this means if you're spraying, you could have a sprayer that's, say, 36 metre wide, but actually you might only be spraying with 24 metres width of the boom. This might be because a certain area of the field you've already been over once, so it will then cut off on section control, so you're not going over the same area twice. So that's a great bit of technology. You're reducing costs there, but also you're actually not doubling up on area as well. The next bit, which is still linked to arable farming, is satellite position, which is auto steer. So auto steer was introduced roughly in the mid-2000s really, but GPS and the technology behind it started coming in roughly around 1990, and it's grown from there. So GPS started off with very much a bit of kit that was in a tractor, and it would say, right, follow this line. Now, I'm not the best person at driving in straight lines, so actually, even with that technology, I wasn't actually saving that much in comparison. So then along came auto steer, fantastic. You can go along with mapping and using the satellites, you can press a button and be able to drive in a straight line. There is no way, or I certainly think it'd be quite interesting if someone could do it. It'd be very impressive to be able to drive in a straight line as the technology can do. And it is fantastic. So this technology saves, massive efficiency saving. You're not going over, overlapping on the land, but it also means as well that you're completing the jobs faster. Now, looking at machinery costs and the fuel cost of it, you can save 10% on fuel by actually doing auto steer in comparison to doing it all by hand. And there's also the human error element if you were to continue driving without the technology. So moving on, I just want to touch on the livestock side. So this technology isn't just with arable farming and with the cropping. The example I want to give is with dairy cows, so with milking. So there are your standard milking parlours where the cows go in, and you need humans to be able to actually attach the clusters. So they're the bits that actually the milk goes into before it goes into the tank. That may have been your more traditional system. However, there's now robotic milking parlours that exist. This means that actually the cows can go into the parlour whenever they want to. They can walk in, get milked, they get some food whilst they're in there, and then they go out again. Now, it's very much they can do it whenever they please. So this mimics more of a natural system. So there's benefits to the cow, as well as saving on labour. And actually, you can save up to 20% on labour costs by swapping to the robotic system. However, and this is a big however, the adoption has been slow. It is increasing, but there is one thing to do with it that farmers jokingly don't really like change. This is up for debate because I know many, many farmers who love to improvise and also look at all the technology coming through. More are now adopting it because there's increased pressure from tighter margins, whether that's financial or on the environmental side. But any idea as to how much a robotic milking unit can cost? Yes? Many thousands indeed. So one robotic unit, dairy unit, could actually cost in excess of £120,000. That's for one unit that can milk between 50 and 80 cows. Now, that's a lot of money. If you've got a couple of hundred cows plus in your herd, that soon adds up. So it is a big financial investment. You have got to weigh up the opportunity cost of this, but that has been a big reason as to why some people have been hesitant in adapting this technology. Even things like auto steer, for example, in the tractors, which is helping you drive in a straight line, they can cost simple units and the very basic ones in excess of £2,500. So they're still expensive. Now, moving on, so what does the future look like? Could you imagine where you've got basically cows that can send you a text message? That could be the future. Some of this technology already exists, where you can actually monitor the health of the cow, but you can't do everything in one go. Well, what about in the future, and this is a possibility, where you can attach a sensor to a cow that actually tells you, is that cow going into labour? Has the cow got an infection? And actually that then could send a text to your phone and you can then act on it. So that's a massive efficiency saving too. Lastly, I just want to touch on the Harper Adams hands-free, well, it started off as Hector and then going to the farm. I don't want to touch on this too much because there is another session after this that will discuss it. Before I chose to go to Harper, I heard something about, hands-free Hector, what's this? Basically, they're doing it, as the name suggests, hands-free and using robotics. So that could potentially be the future as well, of robotics on the livestock and arable side that can help with farming operations and help with reduce soil compaction as well if you're not going as many areas of the field as much. So there's great savings in this. And lastly, I just want to touch on careers. In the future, there's going to be constantly new jobs coming out as technology changes and there's more of a demand for, say, engineering, data analysis, or tech management. So there's so many opportunities within farming, and it's certainly not low tech. So whatever myths might say, there are opportunities for many different people to get stuck in with ag. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I should have mentioned at the top that we have also got Gareth on the screen here, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today due to the rail disruption. We're going to do a Q&A at the end, but for now, I will hand straight over to Hannah for her presentation on agri-energy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yes, so hello everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm a farmer from Hertfordshire, just north of London. So we are arable farmers as well, so we farm cereals such as wheat, barley and oats. And like Emily's family, we've also diversified at our farm. So we're now growing vines as well to produce wine. In and amongst other diversifications as well. As Emily mentioned, there is a huge pressure on British agriculture at the moment, and with high inputs and since we are price takers rather than price makers, we have to constantly evolve and adapt our business. So diversification has been very important for us. So just a little bit about how I got into agriculture before I touch on this topic. I'm actually not agriculturally trained at all. I studied languages at Durham and came into agriculture through my family. A lot of people say farming is in the blood. It's a lifestyle choice, which it certainly is. not many holidays and a lot of long hours. But there was something that drew me back to the farm. And now I'm farming full time and trying to use my languages when I can in the job. So my topic for today is what I'm coining as agri-energy. So not only British agriculture, but global agriculture has a huge opportunity to capitalise on, our need for energy moving forward. Now, I've kind of categorised this into just four quite simplistic, well, they're not simplistic, but four innovations for today. But there are many more, and there will be more to come in the pipeline as technology evolves. But the four I'd just like to touch on briefly are the Methane Tractor, miscanthus and other energy crops, anaerobic digestion, and biofuels. So I won't go into too great detail because obviously we have our Q&A. But just to briefly start, for example, on the Methane Tractor. So this agri-energy that I'm speaking of, it's not only farms producing energy, it's also how we use energy on the farm. And the Methane Tractor is the latest in a number of innovations in the sort of agri-tech industry. So Emily's talked a lot about efficiency, and this is another way we're trying to add on to that. And it's quite incredible. The New Holland Methane Tractor is the world's first 100% methane-powered tractor. So taking those gases out of the environment, which, of course, we're trying to reduce as best we can on farm in many other ways, but then taking them back out of the environment and using them to power our machinery. So this methane tractor, for example, reduces overall emissions by 80%. And apart from that incredible fact, we can also use something which I'll talk about in a second, the biogas that we're producing in anaerobic digesters on farm to power the tractor. So we're almost getting towards that self-sufficient energy on farm, which is a really, really powerful tool for us. And of course, reduces costs on farm. So a lot of different facets to that in itself. Another area that I'd like to touch on, as I mentioned, is energy crops, in particular miscanthus. A colleague of ours on the NFU Ambassador Scheme introduced this to me. I'd never heard of it before. And it's essentially an ever-growing crop. It comes back year on year by itself. It doesn't need to be reseeded, which has its own environmental benefits because of reduced soil compaction. We don't need to constantly drill. It needs little to no fertilizer and grows very well on poor ground. So areas where we might not actually be getting a great food crop, we could be growing something like miscanthus, which a whole nother topic, but in terms of food security means we're not tapping too much into cropping area. Now, miscanthus is fantastic because it can be harvested several times a year. It's chopped up and taken away and then burned for energy. And everything that's released from that will then go back into the grid. And I've got just one statistic of many here. For example, that 1 tonne of miscanthus can produce 18 megawatts of energy, which is enough to power around 20,000 homes. And we'll be producing many tonnes of miscanthus from a usual crop. So this is something that we're considering at our farm, for example, another way to make the land more efficient because we're getting a constant good crop on poor soil. And also we're doing our bit to put something back into the environment in a very positive way. The last couple of ones I just wanted to touch on, firstly, was this anaerobic digestion or biogas creation. Now, this is something that's particularly important on livestock farms where there's a lot of muck that needs to be handled, but also in terms of food waste. So there's a lot of supermarkets now and food producers that are sending their waste to digesters, and all of those gases that usually would be released out into the environment are simply being captured and put back into the grid. And finally, the biofuels. So using crops such as wheat and occasionally oil-based crops, rapeseed oil, for example, and using the starches in those crops for ethanol, for production of fuels, essentially. And again, all going back into the grid, back into the chain of energy. So add these things together and all the other innovations that are coming in the pipeline, and we've got some really exciting agri-energy possibilities. So I'll leave it there for now, but look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both, Emily and Hannah. They're going to come back up now. And has anyone got any questions on the future of agriculture from their perspective as to their presentations this afternoon? Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentations. Given that cows and cattle are one of the biggest sources of methane emissions, how do you see the future of agriculture with cows? Do you think we should all eat a plant-based diet? How do you accommodate that within the future of your profession?
Take it.
So thank you for your question. So very, very topical question indeed. And it's one thing, actually, it's looking at the management of the animals. So there's research at the moment going into cattle diets, for example. So what can you feed cows that actually then lowers their emissions? So that's one area of research that is going on at the moment. There's also looking at areas such as housing for them, as to where are they staying in their sheds, or how are they looked after that can limit any kind of gases escaping out into the atmosphere. Now, simply put, there's areas of the country that are unsuitable for anything other than, say, livestock. Arguably, I can see that on the face, but it's one of those, and it is hotly debated. But you've got the areas of the country, say if we pick upland farming, for example, that actually the grass doesn't grow. The animals on there are very hardy breeds. The reason those breeds are on there is because they are the only livestock really that can survive there. So it is a very hot area, and I won't go into too much detail right now, but there is a lot of research going on. Actually, if you are looking at, say, eating the meat and consuming in particular beef, well, what can we feed them to help reduce that?
Did you want to come back on that at all? Or yeah, just...
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. I just wonder how far do we go with livestock? Should we be stopping eating cattle at all, given how critical the situation is now?
Thank you. And I think it is a very interesting question indeed. And I think we've got to look at actually what does sustainability mean to us as the whole. If we cut one thing out, actually, what does that do to the whole supply chain and actually the link up? It interlinks. And by removing that, what does that do? It is something that I think personally, I'm constantly looking at the research, what journals are coming out and articles that actually we can look at, and not just looking at popular articles, looking into the research to see what's coming out. And I think it's going to be a very interesting area to follow. So I'd say if you're interested in it, keep looking at all the future research that's coming out.
I think, as Emily said, this is an incredibly topical question. And of course, it's easy to say, oh, back British and buy British and things. But I'd say if, of course, everything's a balance in life in terms of what we're eating, and if we, eating too much of one thing and what footprint that leaves on the planet. But certainly within British agriculture, we're trying our utmost to not only maintain the standards that are set, for example, by Red Tractor, but also then to reduce our footprint. After all, we are custodians of the countryside, and our role is to preserve our countryside and look after it. So I definitely think searching within Britain for what we're doing is a really some interesting bedtime reading. And of course, we'd always say that backing British is a great way to try and get that balance, because at least it's local and we know the footprint, if there is any. Yeah, that's what I'd say anyway.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've all learnt a lot about the energy markets, haven't we, that we didn't know before, and that's had knock-on impacts, obviously, in costs in the home. But I don't know, Emily, from your perspective as an arable grower, do you want to just say anything about the cost of artificial fertilizer? And we've sort of come to appreciate the role, perhaps, of animal fertilizer more, and whether there's more we can do with that, given that And if the animals weren't there, how much more reliant we'd be on artificial fertilizer, perhaps?
So this actually ties back into kind of what I was talking about with the precision agriculture and being able to do variable rate application. So for us and many farmers, the price of fertilizer has gone up kind of three times as much, if not more, and it has been into triple figures. So it's just been extortionate. So farmers evidently are looking at other ways to cope with this. So as you said, kind of like the animal manure. What we've been doing at home is looking more at the variable rate application. So actually, we've only got a certain amount of animal manure from our animals. You could buy it in, but that is costly. But actually, rather than having to just blanket spread across our fields, we can use the manure on the areas it needs most. So, for example, there's mapping, and we got our fields map fairly recently, and it gives you all of this data that shows you the nutrients that are in specific areas of the field. So with that, we can then think, right, we've got X amount of tons of manure to be able to spread on the field, and we need to put it in these places. And it means that you can prioritise it in the areas that need it most. So actually you can reduce your reliance on artificial fertilisers, and especially with the price being so expensive. And there is also the environmental argument with fertiliser as well.
Fantastic. Any more questions? Methane Tractor then, I'm just interested by this. So are you saying there is a scenario where in future farmers will be able to produce on farm the fuel to run their own machinery rather than being so reliant on fossil fuels then?
I mean, potentially, yes. And that is the goal. If we can become self-sufficient, as you know, a lot of households are trying to be self-sufficient, putting solar panels on their roofs. It's the same with our business. If we can use the resources we have on farm, not only are we taking those things out of the environment, we're capturing them and putting them back in our machine, reducing our inputs, reducing our costs. So although I'm no scientist and I don't know the ins and outs of the technology like an engineer would, it's in the future and it's very exciting.
Thank you. I just had a question about precision application, and you mentioned it earlier around fertilizers and nitrogen. Are you also looking at that for crop protection inputs? And if you are, I'm interested to know how. And if not, what would drive you to look at that? Thank you.
So I can start it with a one-word answer: is cost, basically. So, like I said, with everything, there is continuous research going on the areas to look how we can farm better and farm smarter. So the big driver for us, talking about chemicals and that you're putting on, yes, going back, there is the environmental risk of it. Actually, if you've got heavy rainfall, again, it leaching, going into runoff into the watercourse. So that's a big area, and we are very, very mindful of that. But the overarching thing for us is cost, that actually we need to save money. Farmers are losing the subsidy or the basic payment scheme. So that's a big blow for many farmers. And actually, I think you'd agree, Hannah, there's many farms that actually will not be profitable at present without it once that's removed. So actually, it is then looking through your business like that of actually, can I reduce, if I reduce my chemical inputs, one, what's the cost of that going to be on the actual crops? Because you don't want to miss out on big yields and that if you've reduced it. But actually, what we've done as well is actually, if, say, we were to reduce at a certain level, what is that cost of the reduced yield? If it's only a small reduction in yield, it might actually be more financially viable to not put it on. So it's just a balancing act, and there's a lot of trial and error, and yeah, looking at financial forecasts and all of that and just monitoring it.
Fantastic. Anything else? Well, it just leaves me to say thank you very much then to our National Farmers Union student and young farmer ambassadors, both Emily and Hannah, for giving up their time on the farm, their busy roles, to come down and chat to... Oh, we have one more. Perfect, yes, please do.
Can I ask a question about what's your suggestions on how tractor condense the soil and how that would affect the long-term sustainability in farming?
Hi, thank you for your question. So this is a hotly debated topic in agriculture, and actually, I don't know which side Emily falls on, so I have to be careful what I say. But there's this, there's a lot of theories in agriculture about what we call min-till, min-tillage versus ploughing. I don't know actually the answer, and I'm going to try and stay diplomatic about it because there is a lot of research happening. So this idea of compaction, the idea of turning over the soil, at the moment, it's difficult to say whether min-till versus ploughing, which one is the best course. And there's a lot of talk about using, for example, more earthworms and things like that, so allowing the soil development by itself. So, for example, on our farm, we're doing a bit of each, so a bit of trial and error. Some crops we find respond better to the min-till. So that means literally drilling straight into, planting the seed straight into an old crop bed. So we're not turning over the soil, we're not ploughing, we're putting it straight in. And that means we're not having to drive over the soil twice. It means we're not turning over the soil, which can expose it to gases in the air and causes other emissions. And in theory will hopefully allow earthworm populations to develop because we're not constantly disturbing the soil. On the flip side of that, others of our crops respond far better to a ploughed soil bed, and there are equally kind of pros to that. By turning over the soil, we're getting rid of the old crop, meaning that we probably won't need to spray anything off there. And it also means that we are creating a nice fine seed bed, so the seeds are likely to take better to the soil, and therefore we might not need to add other additions to help boost them later on. So I don't know if that answers your question. Emily's probably got something to add, but that's what we're doing on our farm, kind of trying a bit of each to see what the effect of that compaction or not compaction really is.
So just to add a bit as well to what Hannah said. So on my farm, we do a bit of both. We do lean more towards the minimum tillage approach. And we found that works mostly for us. And it's also saved on the other areas, such as labour and machinery costs as well. We're not going over the field as much, so it's not taking as much manpower, as it were, to do it. For us, though, we've been doing kind of more the minimum tillage approach for over 5 years now, and it does take a few years to see some sort of return. However, we found certain crops, again, that they haven't worked, so we have had to plough. But I think it's more, from my perspective, an element of rotational ploughing into it, and it's just looking after. We have found actually the soil is now giving back to us. Now we're looking after it more, and soil health's massively increased. But there's other areas to look at as well, such as the kind of the tyres or the tracks that you're using on tractors. So you'll actually see the John Deere tractor that's over behind us, that's on tracks. So that's a good example of how you can actually limit the pressure on the soil. Other ways at home, we've reduced the size of our tractors, so they are basically as small as they can be while still being able to carry out those operations. So that is another way of doing it. But there's many different ways to look at it. But it is also a balance because we do need food. If the yields go down too much and we're not getting the crops, actually, what's the impact of that? We're not getting the food. So it is just a balance, and it's basically looking, I suppose it's the whole term sustainability. You're looking at all the different branches off it to see how you can farm the best and go into the future, but you have got to consider all the different elements of that. So thank you for your question.
Hi. So since we are looking at the future of agriculture, so do you foresee in the future in the UK the possibility of maybe growing exotic fruit like bananas and mangoes here in the UK so that we can increase the variety of our crops and reduce the imports? Is this something that is being researched, for example?
So it's an interesting conversation. I actually had a conversation similar with someone fairly recently. One that is interesting of actually climate change. Yes, it's very, very bad, and we really need to act to make sure that we can farm correctly whilst looking after environment. But actually, what's the knock-on effect? Because if, for example, the temperature does increase slightly, that could open up potentially different crops that we can grow in the UK. So it is looking at that as well. There's a balance because you could say grow some of these crops indoors, but at the moment, very topical with the cost of living and the cost of electricity, actually how much would it cost to grow it? I'd be really interested to look at more research to see how is it going to go in the future. But certainly it's also looking at different varieties, or can you grow a crop and adapt it slightly so it can cope with our climate? So there's also that kind of side of it as well. But I think it's a really, really interesting area to look at going forward.
Yeah, totally agree with Emily there. And I speak from experience as a vine grower. We couldn't have grown vines, well, we probably could have, but struggled with certain varieties. We're growing the classic champagne varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Meunier. These kind of fit into the climate of the Champagne region, which is now moving up into our region in East Anglia. I've recently read an article about successful growth of figs, of olive trees in Essex. So there are a lot more, there's a broader variety of fruits and vegetables, which, one of the reasons we put the vines in was because that particular field was coping very poorly with the current climate for our cereals. It would be far, far too dry in the summer, and then we'd have a very long wet winter. So in the winter, we'd struggle to actually sow our seeds to drill our crops because we couldn't even get on the land. It was so wet. And then anything that we had planted would more or less die of drought or be very thin or weightless. So you're not going to get much flour when you mill it. So for that reason, we went into vines. So I think there could be a lot of possibility in future for adapting to the changing climate, but of course making sure that we are combating and slowing down, the aggressiveness of the change. So.
Thank you. My question is a political question. In light of the procrastination by DEFRA to implement ELMS, or what appears to be an eagerness to remain in the orthodoxy of the CAP, from a legislative perspective, how do you see, how can you predict the future of agriculture?
Sorry, could you just repeat the end of your question, please?
From a legislative perspective, what is the future of agriculture?
Well, it's certainly up in the air a little bit at the moment. It's one of those that how long's a piece of string? I've been talking to various farmers recently, and there is a lot of concern. Actually, they're trying to plan further down the line, and they don't know how much they're going to get in. There is the other argument that actually a farm really is a business, so it should be able to turn a profit. But actually, many farmers do need support. There's other areas that farmers can look at, such as grants. There's a farming investment fund at the moment that's basically there to help farmers have a review of their business, basically, and look how can they farm more sustainably, more efficiently, and hopefully make a profit with the reduction of subsidies, really. So I think it's more of maybe a change in attitudes of farmers going forwards, of looking at, right, we've got our business, we need to farm profitably, what can we do? So as we've mentioned, looking at various different technology innovations and that to help support that. But also looking at the subsidies coming in as kind of an extra. If you can run a profitable business anyway, and then you can get subsidies, that's only going to boost further, but it's not being over-reliant on that. And it is a very topical question and very hotly debated at the moment, because there has been debate that actually is ELMS as it is now, is that actually fit to go out to farmers to support them? Is it adequate for what they need? So there's arguments, I've heard both sides of it, of going on of do we wait or do we push now and at least get something? So it's, very much unknown at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Emily said. It's very, very difficult for us to plan. We're a business and we're relying on government taking necessary steps to help us move forward in our businesses. We've just started a brand new diversification putting in our vineyard this year, and we have no idea where the subsidies may come from, what direction they may lead us in, and the constant conundrum within this conversation has been food security versus environmental. And we really believe they just work hand in hand. So if we can just get a direct answer about how we can bring those two together, we know we can do it. Farmers manage, X percentage of the countryside within the UK. We have this land at our disposal which we want to protect. We rely on it for our business after all, and knowing the future is difficult. We know where we want to go. We want to continue to produce high quality food, protect the environment which we work within, and grow our businesses. That's our simple need, and it is difficult to know the future, but that's what we're going to keep striving for anyway.
Have either of you and your business partners looked at SFI at Elms in at any level? Have you applied, or are you planning to apply?
So we've looked at it. At the moment, our farm, we've got countryside stewardship on it. At the moment, we don't believe that SFI, how it is at the moment, is really worth applying for. That's just our personal opinion on the farm. We've looked at it and went through it with an advisor as well, just to look at actually, could we go for it? But actually, it looks at the moment for us like it'd be more effort than it was worth. It might actually cost us more to put those changes in than actually what we'd receive as a subsidy.
And I should say, by the way, apologies for using jargon there, the SFI is the Sustainable Farming Incentive. It's the bottom tier of the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is the government in England's post-Brexit strategy for farmers, and it's going to be providing payments essentially for public money for public goods, and the first payments are basically for taking better care of your soil, aren't they?
Yeah, and the other area I'd say as well is, so for us personally, we've already been looking at the soil for many years. If we were still on more of a conventional system, so when I say conventional, that's more those that are doing the traditional ploughing and more heavy cultivation. But for us, we've been more min-till anyway, and looking at our soil health, looking at the earthworm counts. So we actually wouldn't get much from it because we wouldn't be changing. We're already doing it. So what's the benefit to us? So for us, with our setup, at the moment, like I said, it's not really worth it.
It certainly has been a huge amount of concern since the change of cabinet, and it sounds like you're following it as interestedly as we are, which is brilliant to see. We really enjoyed the late flurry of questions there. Have we got any more for our two brilliant speakers? Well, unfortunately, the lady who asked the question on compaction, I think, has gone. Otherwise, it was a brilliant segue to our next and final panel of the day, because one of the issues of compaction is as you can see, the tractor behind us, hopefully you've all had a look at it, is enormously large, and probably machinery has reached the capacity now, the size it can possibly get in the UK, simply because tractors fill the roads they're on, right? You couldn't move them around the farms anymore. And so we're going to be talking about agricultural robotics in our final session, which starts in about 20 minutes. And that opens up a world of fascinating possibilities, because you could potentially go right back down to small units then, because you can control multiple ones at a time. You can leave them working for 24 hours a day potentially. So all that and more is going to be discussed with Kit Patworth from the Hands-Free Hectare project at Harper Adams University. So if you are interested in any aspect of agricultural mechanisation, do come back in 20 minutes. But for now, thank you once again to the National Farmers Union NFU ambassadors who are along to tell us and talk all things farming today, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to answer any more questions you have after the session too. So thank you very much, Hannah and Emily, for your time today.